Welcome to our final week of Free People, where we're talking about rules and freedom. To wrap up this series, I have a very important question to ask. What's the last movie you watched? Was there some kind of conflict between the characters? What was that conflict? And what caused it? Every day, countless rules guide our lives. Now there are obvious ones like school rules, no running in the hallways. House rules, be home before curfew. And laws, don't kill anyone. But our lives are also dictated by rules we don't always think about, like laws of nature, gravity, cause and effect, the passing of time. Social norms, don't be a jerk, don't point or stare, hold the door for the person behind you. And moral rules, do what's right, don't lie, cheat, betray, mock, or be cruel to others. In real life and in the movies, there are consequences for breaking rules. Breaking a law might lead to punishment. Trying to break a law of nature, like gravity, will probably lead to injury. And breaking rules that negatively impact others will often result in conflict. Let's reflect on conflict a bit. Have you ever had a conflict with someone in authority? Maybe they gave you a curfew you thought was too early. You were laughing with your friend in class or practice when you were supposed to be paying attention. Or your youth leader called you out and you didn't like it. Have you ever had a conflict with a friend? Maybe one of you was jealous, or someone said something hurtful. Maybe it was a misunderstanding or a miscommunication. Have you been in conflict with someone this week? Today? Are you in a conflict with someone right now? Conflict is an unavoidable part of life, which is why we need to talk about it. We need to know what to do when we're angry with someone because they hurt us. And we need to know what to do when someone is upset with us because of how we've hurt them. If you've been with us for the last few weeks, you know we've been talking a lot about God's law. Today we're going to see how breaking God's law leads to conflict with each other. But God's law doesn't mean laws like don't eat shrimp or don't wear clothes made of two different kinds of fabrics. Those aren't real laws in the Bible, by the way. When we talk about God's law, we're talking about one single commandment from Jesus. Or is it two? I'll let the people from the Bible Project explain.
Question for you.
Okay, yeah.
How many laws is the Great Command? Good question.
Yeah, Jesus said the great command is love the Lord your God. And the second great command is like it.
So there's two great commands.
Well, actually, he only says there's one. Jesus says there's one great command, but then he gives two. Love God and love your neighbor.
So is Jesus just bad at math?
Yeah, I think in Jesus' mind, you love God by loving your neighbor. And when you love your neighbor, you're loving God because you're loving people made in God's image.
That's an extra nugget. It's not even in the video.
We didn't even talk about that in the video. That one's for free.
Now, whether you think of this as one command or two, we've been talking about how to view rules, freedom, and authority with Jesus' law of love in mind. According to Jesus, as long as we're following this rule, we're following all of the rules that really matter. So when we find ourselves in conflict with someone else, I wonder how often it's because someone has broken Jesus' law of love. Another person who tried to view things with the law of love in mind was James. We've been talking about James for the last few weeks, so let's see if you remember anything about him. Who was James's brother? Jesus. What did James lead? The church in Jerusalem. What did he write? A letter that we now call the Book of James. And what was James trying to do? Help Jesus followers learn how to love God and others. Now, because James was leading a lot of people, you can be sure he helped his community resolve tons of conflicts. And when he did, you can be sure he was working hard to advise them according to Jesus' law of love. Let's look at James 4. What is the source of wars and fights among you? Don't they come from your passions that wage war within you? You desire and do not have. You murder and covet and cannot obtain. You fight and wage war. You do not have because you do not ask. You ask and don't receive because you ask with wrong motives, so that you may spend it on your pleasures. Let's break down James's observations. People had been fighting. This really isn't a surprise. People fight a lot. Now, disagreeing with someone doesn't necessarily mean you're not being loving, but many of our conflicts happen because we haven't loved others like we love ourselves. Selfishness and jealousy cause conflict. We can all be selfish sometimes. We want to get our way, be right, have what someone else has, or be the best. And those desires lead to conflict. But we can't love others and be jealous or selfish at the same time. We scheme to get what we want. Now, you and I may have never killed anyone to get our way, but we've probably come up with a good scheme or two in order to get what we want. But we can't love others while manipulating, making demands, or pressuring people to get what we want. And our motives are often wrong. James reminds us that God doesn't honor selfish motives. If you're not getting what you want, even if you've been praying for it, maybe it's because you've been asking with selfish motives. Because we can't truly be loving while being self-serving. James is describing me-centered thinking. This is not what Jesus meant when he said to love God and love others as we love ourselves. We can't follow the law of love and be me-centered at the same time. Now, this might sound strange coming from somebody at church, but you're free to do whatever you like. Are you free to be selfish? Yes. Are you free to speak badly about others? Yes. Are you free to be judgmental? Yep. Are you free to be bitter, arrogant, cruel, resentful, impatient, unkind, or rude? Yeah. Nothing you do will change God's love for you. But if you did these things, would you be fulfilling Jesus' law of love? No. We might think freedom means doing whatever you want, whenever we want. But can you imagine the consequences? If you lived your life entirely for yourself, do you think you'd be happy? Do you think you'd be fulfilled? Do you think you'd have meaningful relationships with others? I don't think so. So what's the alternative to me-centered thinking? How do we avoid unnecessary conflict with others? How do we resolve conflicts when they happen? And how do we do all of this according to Jesus' law of love? Maybe the best thing we can do is to look to the one who gave us the law of love. Because it's not just Jesus' words that teach us how to love, it's his actions as well. The first passage I'm going to read are the words of Jesus. The second passage recounts the actions of Jesus. This is my command. Love one another as I have loved you. No one has greater love than this, to lay down his life for his friends. This is how we have come to know love. He laid down his life for us. We should also lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. Jesus was God, which meant he really did have the freedom to do whatever he wanted. This whole universe is his, along with everything and everyone inside it. He had the power to do anything he wants to do at any time. But what did he do? He gave up his life. Jesus chose to give up his freedom in two ways. Although he was God, he chose to humble himself by inhabiting a human body here on earth. And he chose to give up his own life, submitting to torture and death. Why did he do it? Because he loves us and wanted us to be free. Through his life, death, and resurrection, Jesus gave us freedom we could never have found on our own. Freedom from sin and condemnation forever. And freedom to live a full and abundant life right now. Jesus freely gave up his freedom in order to love you and me, and then he told us to do the same for each other. And that's the ironic thing about freedom. Free people give up their freedoms for others. Not because they have to, but because they choose to in love. Remember back to that movie I had you think of. There are so many movies where one character makes a huge sacrifice for others. There's something about these scenes that move us. These stories of sacrifice remind me of the sacrifice Jesus made in order to save me. And even though it's easy for me to be selfish and self-centered, these stories show me that deep down, I want to be someone who's willing to make sacrifices for the people I love. I think you do too. True freedom is found when you love God and others first. You're free to be in charge of your own life and live it without Jesus. But you'll find greater freedom when you let him lead you. You're free to make yourself the center of your own universe at the expense of the relationships around you. But you'll find greater freedom when you give up some of your freedoms in order to love others well. When you give up some of your freedoms in order to love God and others, you'll discover a more fulfilling kind of life. Your relationships will deepen. You'll grow in kindness, patience, forgiveness, compassion, and grace. And you'll grow closer to your Creator. A few minutes ago, I asked some questions to show that we all sometimes experience conflicts with others. Right now, I want you to think of someone you currently have conflict with, or who you often have conflict with. Got a name? Great. Write their name down as a reminder that there's something about your relationship with them that's holding you both back from freedom. Maybe it's a hurt or offense that needs to be confessed or forgiven. Maybe it's your attitude. Maybe it's your me-centered thinking. Even if you're sure they're the problem in your relationship, your actions are either adding to or helping to solve the conflict. Now, write some ideas about how you might be able to sacrificially love that person better. Take a few minutes to get started. So when have you put others first? You know how to make sacrifices for others when you have a conflict. I know you've done it before. Take a moment to think about ways you've put others first in the past. Maybe you were the first to apologize. Maybe you didn't respond in anger even when you had a really good comeback prepared. Or maybe you chose to listen instead of speak. When have others put you first? Think about a time when someone else made a sacrifice for you. Maybe they always put you first because they're your parent. Maybe they did something difficult or uncomfortable to show you they loved you. Maybe they said or gave you something meaningful. Now, how have you been putting yourself first? Be honest with yourself. When it comes to the person you've been in conflict with, how have you put yourself first? Have you said hurtful things because it made you feel better? Have you ignored them? Mocked or talked badly about them? Lied about them? Have you been stubborn, difficult, dramatic, rude, or defiant? Sure, you're free to act this way, but it's harming your relationship with this person and keeping you from following Jesus' law of love. So what can you do differently? How can you give up some of your freedoms, like the freedom to say or do whatever you want, in order to love them like Jesus loves you? How can you sacrifice for them? Keep in mind, putting others first doesn't mean you stop taking care of yourself. You'd be pretty unhealthy if you did that. Jesus isn't calling us to make so many sacrifices for others that we become unhealthy. But I'm guessing there are some sacrifices you can make for others that would help you move away from me-centered thinking and start living with more love. Just like Jesus gave up his freedoms in order to love you, there's something you can do to sacrificially love someone else, especially someone you're fighting with. Remember that free people give up their freedoms for others, not because they have to, but because they choose to in love.